Ignite your passion for the eternal Word while searching for ancient tested answers to today's questions. Delve into the mysteries of the Bible to discover ancient Jewish wisdom with Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Now, here is today's program.
Hi, welcome. If this is your first time joining us, welcome aboard. We're glad to have you at Ancient Jewish Wisdom with my husband, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, and me. If you're returning, if you've been watching a few shows already, if maybe you've even emailed us, well, nice to spend some more time with you then. You know, one of the most exciting things I've done in my life was actually being a homeschooling mom. I homeschooled for over 16 years. I started homeschooling before it was sort of in the general vernacular. Certainly a lot of people had done it, but it was under the covers. People didn't talk about it. It was not something that if you use the word homeschool, most people knew what you were talking about. And when I started, it was a surprise to me. We started because one particular child had a specific need that the school wasn't fulfilling. And we started with her, and we were having such a good time, and it was so wonderful for our relationship with her and so exciting that we took everybody else out, and then our younger kids never started school. And there are a lot of wonderful surprises along the road when you homeschool, and one of them for us was a gentleman who became a very close friend of our family. He was actually a retired Washington State Supreme Court Justice, and his name was William Cassius Goodloe. Am I getting it right?
A fantastic man.
He was an amazing man.
He was a devout Christian, a very religious man, and a gentleman, a nobleman, a Renaissance man, and a wonderful, wonderful friend. God rest the soul of William Cassius Goodloe.
And what happened, one of the advantages of homeschooling is he had a business meeting with my husband. That's how they met. And my husband brought him home. And since the kids were home and I was home, we were all home, we all got to meet him and to embrace him and welcome him. And he joined us one Friday night for a Shabbat meal. And we're sitting around the table. And he was an elderly, very distinguished-looking gentleman. And our kids at that point, I mean, our youngest was 1 year old. Our oldest was probably about 11.
Did you say that he was a judge on the Washington State Supreme Court?
I think I did.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, in the middle of this conversation about politics or something that really was above the head of the kids, he all of a sudden turned to the kids at the table and he said, "Would you like to hear a poem?" And they said, "Yes." And he said, "Fleas, Adam had 'em." And the kids thought this was hysterical, and the conversation went back to politics. And about 5 minutes later, he turned and said, "Would you like to hear another poem?" And they said yes. And this time he recited a poem called "The Man in the Mirror." And I don't think they understood all the words, but they were caught up in his delivery, and they knew something had happened. And the conversation went back to the adult conversation. And a few minutes later, he turned and said, "Do any of you know any poems?" And well, they jumped up, and one of the children said, "Oh, I have a poem in a book in my room." And he said, "Oh no, that doesn't count. A poem only counts if you know it by heart. Tell you what, I'm going to be back here in 2 weeks to have a meeting with your dad. Why don't you memorize a poem, and then you'll tell it to me next time." And throughout the meal, he kept on reciting some poems. And a few days later, in the mail, this was pre-email days, in the real live mail, the children got a package, and they were some of the poems that he had recited. Well, I think everyone, not my 1 year old, and I think that we had a 4-year-old who may have been left out of this, but everybody else, the older children, all memorized one of the poems that he sent. And when he showed up 2 weeks later, you couldn't have found a more proud bunch of kids who stood up there and recited these beautiful poems to him. And that really ignited, in our little homeschool, that ignited a passion for poetry. And to this day, if somebody mentions a certain word and all my kids are around the table and it happens to be the beginning of a poem or a line that was in a poem, the kids will start and they'll go round robin where each of them will do a line, and they get a lot of pleasure out of the poems they memorized. So I think poetry is wonderful. That's the bottom line. However, I'll tell you where poetry isn't wonderful. Where it isn't wonderful is when people dismiss parts of the Bible because they say, that's poetic language. It's not really, it doesn't really matter. That's just the way the Bible speaks. The Bible it's literature. The Bible is really valuable literature. It's good poetry, some of it. No, sorry, it's not. It's God's message to humanity. And dismissing it as poetry, there is poetry in the Bible, but dismissing it as poetry and only poetry is a huge mistake. And one of the examples I thought we might look at today is there's a poetic sounding phrase that appears pretty often, actually. If you would go through a concordance, you'll find it popping up. And the phrase is, and he, sometimes in she, lifted his eyes, or lifted her eyes, or they lifted their eyes. That's not the way we speak, right? I mean, you don't walk around the supermarket and say, I lifted my eyes and saw the Cheerios.
I mean, what it suggests is somebody sort of squeezing out, one eye and squeezing out the other, and then lifting them up, lifting up my eyes.
So we accept it and we go, well, that's Bible language. But Bible language only means something we should look into.
Yes, exactly. So should we take a look at an instance or two of that?
I think so.
Genesis chapter 13, verse 10. That's one example. That was Lot. Abraham and Lot living together, succeeding, prospering, lots and lots of flock, and the shepherds of Abraham and the shepherds of Lot didn't get on. Ancient Jewish wisdom fills in some of the gaps there. Why didn't they get on? Well, it turned out that Abraham had instructed his shepherds to not allow the flocks to graze on any property that didn't belong to him. Even commons property along the side of the road and so on, Abraham would not allow his shepherds to graze the animals. Lot was a little more flexible on that, and the shepherds argued about it. And finally, Abraham said, look, it's more important that the two of us remain close than that we remain geographically close. I don't want the shepherd's argument to turn into a feud that then begins to separate our families. You're my nephew. Why don't we just move a little further apart? After all, you're successful enough, you can build your own financial empire now. And chapter 13, verse 10 reads, Vayisa Lot et Einav, and Lot lifted up his eyes, Vayar et kol kikar hayarden, and he saw the entire plain of the Jordan stretched out before him, and it was very lush and beautiful ground, and that was where he chose. This was well before God destroyed the city of Sodom. Lot chose to go and live down there. He lifted up his eyes.
So let's take this as the first clue. If we're doing an analysis of what this phrase means in the Bible, well, this doesn't end up working so well. He actually made a bad choice. It wasn't that he lifted his eyes and now elevated himself in some way. He's making a bad choice. Let's look at somebody else. Do you have another example?
Of course, we have another example. Whatever you need. This one is Abraham. And we're looking at Genesis chapter 22, verse 4 now. God has asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. And so Abraham took his son and he took a young man to help. They went off on a donkey and they started journeying towards the place that God was going to disclose. And finally, here we are, verse 4. Bayom hashlishi, and it was on the third day, Vayisa Avraham et Einav. Abraham lifted up his eyes.
So in this case, he's doing a very good thing because he's following God's direction. And so we had Lot where it didn't work out so well, but here Abraham, it's a very positive. He's doing the right thing. He's lifting his eyes to see where God wants him to go.
And Vayar et hamakom meirachok. He saw the place from afar. What place? Mount Moriah, Jerusalem, where the sacrifice was going to take place. And as I think everybody knows, that exact altar is what is found to this very day in the Muslim Dome of the Rock, right on the Temple Mount in the city of Jerusalem. Pretty important place.
Okay, can we do one more? And this one, it's a double header. We have a double
go for
header.
It.
Chapter 24, I believe.
Yes.
And verses
63 and 64.
Thank you, 63 and 64. This is going to be the first meeting of Isaac and Rebekah. And she's being brought. Abraham sent his servant to go find a wife for his son Isaac. And after an entire interesting story that we can talk about another time, Isaac brings back Rebekah. And as Rebekah comes, Isaac, you knew it, lifts up his eyes and sees Rebekah, and Rebekah lifts up her eyes and sees Isaac. So what commonality, what can we find in common? And again, there are literally dozens of more places where people lift their eyes in the Bible. But let's try to understand what that phrase adds. It wasn't put there for poetry. It wasn't put there so we could have Bible-sounding language. It was put there for a reason. What does the phrase lifting one's eyes mean? And when we were speaking about this earlier, you mentioned actually one of the things in your life that I am less happy about. I mean, it's past, so it's fine, but it's not my favorite activity, was when you used to ride a motorcycle.
Yes. Ah, those were the days.
Yeah, youth and stupidity. If you know. I'm not a big fan of motorcycles.
Considering how incompatible we are, it's really remarkable that we have such a good time together.
Anyway, but you did learn a lesson from riding a motorcycle.
I learned a lot of lessons from learning a motorcycle, but perhaps one of the most important ones was there are a lot of counterintuitive things about riding a motorcycle. It's not what you'd think. And do you remember that I actually took a high-speed course with the California Highway Patrol years ago? They used to offer a course, an advanced course for riders. And I was sort of pretty fancied myself on two wheels. I sort of thought of myself, I lived too late a period to become what I really would have liked to be, which was a cowboy. That wasn't going to happen.
I thought you wanted to be a pirate.
Well, I wanted to be a pirate also.
Okay.
Yeah. Did we ever talk about how many Jewish pirates there used to be in the Caribbean in the 70s? We got to tell you about that sometime. We absolutely want to tell you about that. Turns out in the 1600s and all the way into the early 1700s, there were a lot of Jewish pirates in the Caribbean. When I discovered this, I studied it all up because it just sort of felt comforting for me to be able to know there was an alternative career path, should it ever be necessary.
But back to the motorcycles.
Back to the motorcycles, yes. Couldn't be a cowboy, so I sort of thought of my motorcycle as my iron horse, and I loved it, and I thought I was pretty hot on a motorcycle. I took this course with the California Highway Patrol. I was astounded at how little I knew. It was amazing how much there really was to know about becoming a safe and effective rider. As safe as you can be on a motorcycle, because in the final analysis, car drivers don't see you. You feel invisible. It's the scariest thing in the whole world. When you cross a street, you're crossing a street and a car pulls to a stop, don't you look into the windshield? Most times you meet eyes with a driver for just a moment, and that confirms that he saw you. And you do this when you're driving down a street and there's somebody waiting at a side street to join in the traffic, and you're a little bit worried. Does he see you? Is he going to wait? You slow down a bit. You got the right of way. You keep going, but you kind of lock eyes with him because you just want to make sure that he sees you. When you're riding a motorcycle, as any of you who do would already know, you try and lock eyes with people in cars. Half the time, they're not seeing you. That's what makes it so dangerous, and that's why I do not ride a motorcycle anymore. I just don't. Not because I think I can't ride, not because I don't think it would be a lot of fun and very enjoyable. I mean, somebody had me on his ranch in Texas a few weeks back, and I had a chance to ride. It was great. But out in the streets, it's just disturbing. But here's one of the most interesting things that I learned, and it's pretty basic. Now I think back, it's pretty obvious, but I can't tell you what an exciting thing it was to discover while I'm riding along. And that is the correct way to drive a curve. The correct way to drive a curve, well, let me start and say this. Look, whether you're driving a car or a motorcycle, you don't keep your eyes fixed on the piece of road immediately in front of your vehicle. Nobody does that. You're using sort of peripheral vision to see that nobody runs into the street right ahead of you, but by and large, your eyes are fixed a little further down the road. Now, when you're riding a motorcycle through a curve, you would have thought, okay, your eyes are going to be fixed in the same place, somewhere down the road, not right in front of your motorcycle, but a little further down the road. The funny thing is you don't. The right way to take a motorcycle through a curve, as I was taught, is to be looking at the end of the curve, where you're coming out of the curve, not straight ahead. Because what they said to me was, you will go where you're watching. You look at the guardrail halfway through the bend, that's kind of where you're likely to go if you're not careful. Your body is going to be trying to take you there. Don't. You're leaning over into the curve. Your eyes are now over to the end of the curve over there.
So something else they could have said to you, lift up your eyes, couldn't they have?
That's what they're saying to me now. Don't let your eyes stay where they naturally would have gone. Make your eyes go where you need to go. Your eye must go where you are going to lead, where you're going to follow, is what I mean to say.
That is the commonality in all four examples that we were speaking about. Look, Lot made a bad decision. Going to Sodom wasn't a good choice, but it was where he wanted to go. He lifted up his eyes and he saw the future away from Abraham, which is where he chose to go. When Abraham lifted up his eyes, he was looking ahead. He was saying, I want to end up where God is sending me. You lift your eyes and look. And Rebekah and Isaac, upon meeting each other, it wasn't, do I think she'll like me? Do I think he's going to think I'm funny? It was lifting their eyes to a vision of the future. This was going to be a patriarch and matriarch of the Jewish people. It was lifting their eyes and seeing that vision down the road and where it would take them. And what a great lesson for our lives today, because it is so easy to get caught up in day-to-day tasks, right? There are things you just have to do, ranging from brushing your teeth to getting out and going to your job or getting supper on the table, whatever it is so easy to get caught up and just have one day follow another. And it really is worthwhile stopping and saying, I need to lift my eyes. I need to go, where do I want to end up? And I actually gave a talk to a group of women in Texas a few months ago. And the idea was that it was women who, for the most part, had very young children, which meant they were grappling with things like toilet training or how to keep a 2-year-old from picking peas up and throwing them on the floor one by one, or sleeping and all sorts of things that are tiring and need a lot of attention and can end up just taking over your day. And what I spoke about was basically lifting their eyes. In other words, we're not really raising children, we're raising adults. When you have children, your goal is not, my goal is to get this child to 3.5. The goal is to raise an adult who, when you're no longer there, not only isn't going to pick the peas off their plate and throw them on the floor, but is going to follow your vision, is going to follow your moral, your values, your relationship with God, your relationship with society. And so I said, it's so easy to get caught up in day-to-day. You need to have a business meeting with yourself and your spouse. There was all women, so in this case it would have been their husbands. And sit down and say, let's picture this child at 20. Let's picture this child at 30. What is the final product that we are trying to work on? And it makes a world of difference how you handle. It's funny, because looking back, even something like toilet training or stopping that pea throwing, you handle it differently when you're picturing. Partially you just say, is this a major thing? Is this going to be a big deal? Or what aspect of it is a big deal? The big deal is I want them to have a healthy relationship with food. The big deal is I want them to have a healthy relationship with their body. So when I know what the big deal is, when I know what my vision is for that adult down the road, then it changes how I function as a parent dealing with this child right now. And that's true. It's true in business. If you're starting a business, you don't want to know where the business is going to be in a month. You want to know where the business is going to be your 5-year plan.
That's exactly right. And it also helps you deal with some of the upset and the frustrations and the fears along the way. As I think you said, if your focus is on, I want my 6-year-old to be a great 6-year-old, then anything that goes wrong is a major calamity. But if the 6-year-old it's just a path on the road to a developed adult that is truly going to be a credit to God trusting you with that soul, then the small upsets along the path are not that big a problem, because there's a greater scope to the picture. And the same thing is true in business, where there are incredible frustrations and challenges along the way. And if you're only focused on the present, then every little hiccup is enough to throw you into a state of complete hopelessness and gloom. It isn't like that. It isn't like that.
You know, I think we give an example. We have an audio CD teaching called Madam, I'm Adam, Decoding the Marriage Secrets of Eden. And
there it is. Well, hold it right up.
I just remembered that we spoke about, one of the things we speak about is it's a father, there's a mother, and there's a child. Well, you've got three, there's a triangle there. And that it's so easy, it's very easy for a mother, particularly with a young baby or a young child, to get very wrapped up in that child. But when you look down the road and you say, well, what is my vision for our family? Well, that vision includes the father as well, and includes the husband. And so even though it's easy to get wrapped up in the mother-child relationship, and even your hormones, if you're breastfeeding, your hormones contribute to getting you wrapped up and falling passionately in love with this baby. But if you keep the vision of the family, then you make sure to leave room, not only for the father. Right now, everybody's very big onto the father bonding with the baby, but the marriage has to stay front and central in your mind. You still have to keep your vision of a marriage and a marital relationship between a husband and wife, that even though there's this endearing and exhausting new individual who's come into the family, you don't want to let go, because your vision is that even if it's only thinking of the child, your vision is that you want to raise this child in a family with a father.
That's such an important point. And if I could trouble you for this product, Madam, I'm Adam, one of the most important messages in this is exactly the one you're talking about. And I really just want to emphasize it, because I happen to have recently been looking at a number of women's magazines, and it just so happens that several of the letters revolved around this idea of men feeling that once the baby arrives, their marital life falls apart. It's just not there anymore. And women are talking to the magazine, or they're writing to the magazine saying, you know, what am I supposed to do? And as you correctly said, Susan, their very hormones are urgently calling them to focus on this 10-pound blob of protoplasm. Meanwhile,
I don't think actually mothers think of it as a blob of protoplasm, usually.
Sorry, this beautiful Bonnie baby. Meanwhile, we guys are out on the sidelines saying, thanks a lot. You know, had we known that this is what life was going to be like, we wouldn't have even contributed to producing this baby. We didn't know that was kind of the last time we'd ever have the opportunity to be with you. And yet that's kind of what happens. And one of the things we discuss here is exactly what Susan was talking about, which I found such an exciting lesson from Scripture, which is that Eve says when Cain is born, she says, I have acquired a man through God. And everybody makes a mistake of assuming that what she's talking about is she's now acquired this little baby boy Cain, her eldest son, who, by the way, down the road comes to no good. But that's not what she's saying. Ancient Jewish wisdom teaches she's talking about acquiring her husband, Adam, that her relationship with Adam is intensified at this point. And there's a general rule. The purpose of God's message to mankind, the Bible, is to help us do what is not natural. That's why there's no rule in the Torah where Moses says, hey, Israelites, don't forget to eat 3 solid meals every day.
With a few snacks in between.
With some snacks in between, right? Doesn't say that. Or, hey, Israelites, make sure you breathe regularly. Keep breathing. Nothing like that at all. Things that you don't have to be told to do, you're going to do anyway, you won't find in the Bible. But anything that's told to us in the Bible, you must know, doesn't come naturally. It's a struggle.
And there's also guideposts, and I think that's what the lifting eyes is. It's a guidepost to say to us, yes, as you're going through your life, look at all these examples and follow them, to lift your eyes, to have a vision, to see where you want to end up. And don't make the mistake of just looking one step ahead at where your next foot is going to fall. Look way down the road. And one of the other things that Justice Goodloe, by being friends with our children, and it was a wonderful relationship. He was an elderly man, and he would come and he would do poetry readings with the kids. He also came and taught them watercolor lessons. And from my perspective as a mother, I was pleased they were learning poetry. I was pleased they were learning watercolor. More than anything, I was pleased that they were getting to be in the presence of a man who was just a wonderful example of what we would hope our son would grow into to emulate, the type of adult that our daughters could see themselves being, could see themselves marrying. It was somebody who was upright and honest and God-fearing. And this was, the more time that they spent in his presence, the greater their vision would be of what they could accomplish and what they could be as adults. And so he really lifted the eyes of our family.
That was it, yeah. Lift your eyes to where you want to go. Focus on where you want to be. And one of the great joys of our life is the honor and privilege we have of appearing as speakers at churches around the country. We count among our friends some of the finest and most extraordinary pastors around the United States of America. Susan referred to speaking in Dallas recently, and I spoke extensively for a number of the Covenant churches in Dallas a couple of weeks back on our last visit. One of the things we love is when you come up to us. When I'm speaking at your church and you come up and afterwards and say, hi, I see you on TCT television. We love that. So please do that. Stay in touch. Let us know if you're going to be somewhere. A way we have of letting you know where we're going to be speaking is if you subscribe to our free email called Thought Tools. Just do that by going onto our website, www.rabbidaniellapin.com. www.rabbidaniellapin.com. And when you receive a weekly email with a message, something along the lines of what we give to you each program here on TCT television, we'll also tell you when we'll be in your neighborhood. And also, by the way, you might want to speak to your church and see if your church would like to have us come along and do some Bible teaching there, bringing the lessons of ancient Jewish wisdom to your community. We'd love to do that. At any rate, we want to be able to stay in touch with you, and we want to be able to make certain that by you investing your time and your resources in making TCT possible, we want to make sure that your time is amply rewarded and that you have an opportunity to gain new insights into God's message for each and every one of us, new insights that will make God smile upon how you are running your life, how you are conducting your family and your business, all of these things attempting to try and bring yourself into line with the rules and structures that God built into the world in such a way so as that you are going to be able to benefit and increase your connectivity, not only with your friends and with your family and with your business associates, but obviously the most important relationship of all, with God.
Thank you for watching Ancient Jewish Wisdom with Rabbi Daniel Lapin.